Every great art movement has its pioneers, artists whose work doesn't just define an era, but challenge the way we see the world. Ken Sugimori gave Pokémon its identity. Mitsuhiro Arita transformed Pokémon cards into works of art. But one artist chose a completely different path. He didn't paint Pokémon the way people expected. He painted them the way only he could. This is Tomokazu Komiya. When people first discover Tomokazu Komiya's artwork, their reaction is often the same. This doesn't look like Pokémon. Their proportions feel unusual. The colors are bold. The perspective can seem distorted. Everything appears just a little different, and that's exactly why his artwork is unforgettable. While many illustrators try to present Pokémon in familiar ways, Komiya created a visual language that was entirely his own. His cards don't ask for your attention, they demand it. Tomokazu Komiya started working on the Pokémon TCG in 1996. His first released card illustrations debuted with the Neo Genesis expansion. Long before Pokémon became one of the world's biggest entertainment franchises, Komiya was already helping shape its visual identity through his own distinctive artistic voice. Unlike many artists whose careers begin with a single defining moment, Komiya's path started much earlier. He studied at the Toyo Institute of Art and Design, where he developed the artistic foundations that would later define his career. While he was still a student, he and a friend created handmade postcards and sold them at a local flea market. One day, a professional illustrator happened to see their work. She encouraged Komiya to pursue illustrations professionally and suggested he apply to work with a magazine published by Shogakukan. That simply conversation changed the course of his life. Years later, it would also change the history of Pokémon card art. When Komiya joined the Pokémon Trading Card Game, he quickly realized something. His illustrations didn't look like anyone else. At first, he tried to draw Pokémon in a more conventional style, a style that felt closer to what people expected. But something wasn't right. In later interviews, Komiya explained that he eventually accepted an important truth. People didn't want him to draw like everyone else. They wanted him to draw like Tomokazu Komiya. That realization became the foundation of his artistic philosophy. Rather than chasing perfection, he embraced individuality. Unlike many illustrators whose work almost entirely digitally, Komiya enjoys experimenting with traditional materials. Over the years, he has used acrylic gouache, colored pencils, markers, ballpoint pens, and many other techniques. He has even said that if he uses the same method for too long, he becomes bored. Curiosity drives his creativity. Every new material becomes another way to explore ideas. That willingness to experiment is reflected in his artwork. No two illustrations feel exactly the same, and yet every single one is unmistakably Komiya. His willingness to experiment didn't just shape the way he worked, it shaped the way people experienced his art. At first glance, a Komiya illustration can feel chaotic, Their proportions aren't always realistic. Their perspective can be unexpected. Sometimes a Pokémon appears almost childlike, other times strangely unsettling. But the longer you look, the more intentional everything becomes. Komiya isn't trying to recreate reality. He's creating emotion. Rather than presenting Pokémon as perfect creatures, he presents them as living personalities. Some appear playful, others curious. Some seem awkward, others almost mysterious. Every expression, every exaggerated shape, and every unusual composition exists to tell you something about that Pokémon's character. His illustrations don't simply ask, "What does this Pokémon look like?" They ask, "What does this Pokémon feel like?" The question has defined Komiya's work for nearly 3 decades. One of the best examples of his artistic philosophy is Slowpoke. Instead of focusing on power or action, Komiya embraces the Pokémon's relaxed and absent-minded personality. The composition feels calm, almost humorous. Nothing dramatic is happening, and yet the illustration tells a complete story. It reminds us that not every memorable piece of Pokémon art needs explosions or legendary battles. Sometimes personality alone is enough. The same philosophy can be found across many of his illustrations. Whether he paints common Pokémon or legendary ones, Komiya rarely treats them as heroes standing proudly before the viewer. Instead, they exist inside their own strange and wonderful worlds. Trees bend, colors shift, backgrounds feel dreamlike. Perspective becomes part of the storytelling. Every element of the composition works together to create an emotion rather than simply describe a scene. This is why a Komiya card is often recognizable long before you notice his signature. His style doesn't depend on one specific technique, it depends on a way of seeing the world. Perhaps the most remarkable part of Komiya's career is that he never abandoned his artistic identity. As the Pokémon Trading Card Game evolved, illustration styles changed dramatically. Digital painting became more common, cards became increasingly detailed, printing technology improved, yet Komiya never felt the need to imitate anyone else. Instead, he continued refining the artistic language that had always been his own. In interviews, he's spoken about accepting that his work would always be different. Rather than seeing that as a weakness, he embraced it. What once made his illustrations unusual eventually became the reason collectors could recognize them instantly. One of Komiya's most memorable reflections perfectly captures his philosophy. He once imagined children who grew up with the Pokémon TCG looking back years later and remembering his illustrations simply as those weird ones. For many artists that might sound like criticism. For Komiya it was enough. Because being remembered means creating something that leaves an impression. And few Pokémon artists have left a more distinctive impression than Tomokazu Komiya. Today, after illustrating Pokémon cards for nearly 3 decades, Komiya has become one of the most recognized artists in the history of the Pokémon Trading Card Game. Not because his work follows the rules, but because it reminds us that great art doesn't always come from fitting in. Sometimes it comes from having the courage to remind yourself. Ken Sugimori gave Pokémon its identity. Mitsuhiro Arita transformed trading cards into unforgettable stories. Tomokazu Komiya showed that Pokémon art could be deeply personal. That originality can matter more than perfection. And that sometimes the illustrations we never forget are the ones that dare to be different. Thank you so much for listening and watching my video. Leave a like and a comment. I really appreciate your support. And if you haven't followed me yet, follow me. More videos are coming. Stay tuned. I might surprise you more than you think. Stay healthy and happy, beautiful soul. See you soon again. Take care. Bye.